to the Luminators podcast. In this audio portal experience, we cast light on the dark places that modern humans have forgotten the sacredness of life. Through the lens of creativity, the energetic body, holistic healthcare, and more, we hope to offer you a shift in your perspective about your human experience. I invite you now to open your legs, heart, ears, and mind to the transformative energy of remembering the sacredness of life. Hi, Loomies. Welcome back to the Luminators podcast, where we have bold, sometimes taboo conversations to awaken us to remember the sacredness of life. I am Lindsay, and if you have been following us from the genesis of this podcast and did not catch our last episode, my beautiful and potent, powerful co-host Liz has transitioned her creative endeavors and is killing it as a leader in the Pilates world. We are so happy to see her thriving and sharing her magic in that arena. But that being said, this episode will be shifting into a different format where I will be continuing the legacy of the Luminators and interviewing fellow light being souls to activate and reframe many subjects that we love to bring to light here in this space. With that being said, I am so stoked to announce that I will be doing a series for the next coming episodes on this podcast that will be so juicy and medicinal for both soul brothers and sisters who are seeking to really connect with the sacredness of life. And this series is called Making the Masculine Divine Again. And I will be interviewing some incredible men that have crossed my personal path and truly who have made me the woman I am today. So my first guest is one of my dearest friends, soulmates, brothers, creative designer for my personal business, so much more. I am so excited for you guys to hear his heart on the subjects of divine masculinity and what he has walked through in these potent 40 years earthside. So without further ado, it is my honor and my pleasure to introduce Mr. Robert Pizzolatto. How are you? Halloween! So what an interesting day to explore this beautiful subject of divine masculinity.
Yeah, we're doing it.
We're just doing it. We're just going to do it. So, Louise, this subject is so near and dear to my heart, as of course I know, in past episodes we've talked a lot about masculine energy and feminine energy and all the ways in which these concepts and essences kind of have made their way, I think, back into like modern conversations about how we're relating to each other and how that really affects how we express ourselves through dating and marriage and even within our own beings. So I'd love to dive in and just to see where this conversation flows and see where spirit leads down all the rabbit holes that we can get into with what masculinity is, what divine masculinity is. I know there's been so many concepts and words that have been tossed around in culture with feminist movements, toxic masculinity, and what is masculinity, and what is it really, and all the concepts that we're trying to comprehend to further understand ourselves. But yeah, let's just kick it off with really, Robbie, what does the divine masculine mean to you at this point in your journey?
Well, that's kind of a loaded question, but I'll do my best.
Just how we like them.
Yeah, I'll do my best to talk a little bit about it in hopefully a succinct way. And also just a disclaimer, I don't know if I really know, I mean, I love the question and I love to think about that, but I don't want to claim to know what divine masculinity really is per se, or perhaps it's just different for everyone to some degree. I guess I'll preface my bit on that by saying that I think part of why it's important to talk about is because I feel as though I grew up in a time in which I'd never heard that term. I'd never sort of considered not only what divine masculinity is, but really what masculinity is at all in my experience as like a younger man and growing up as a kid, and whether it's like my relationship with my father or religion and spirituality and my relationship to other men. And it wasn't really something that was talked about hardly at all. And certainly in the divine sense. And so I feel like I'm just coming to understanding it now. And there's a lot to sort of unpack and break down and reprogram. But to try to answer your question, I think divine masculinity is first of all, understanding what it is to have a relationship with God and with yourself. And then as a man, what that means to sort of understand and embrace and inhabit masculinity in its, I guess you could say, truest or most natural, pure, healthy form.
Right.
Because you mentioned the word toxic masculinity, which is a term that maybe people are more familiar with even than divine masculinity. And I think
Yes.
that's because a lot of men, perhaps, or whether it's because of the individual or cultural sort of programming or just generational, stuff, that some of the masculine traits have become distorted and did become
Mm-hmm.
toxic.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we all sort of know what that looks like to some degree. And so it's trying to heal, let's say, those broken or hurt, toxic aspects of the masculinity and bring it back to a more healthy, holistic, um, yeah, natural and divine form of it, which is, I mean, again, it's kind of a complicated
Yeah.
thing to talk about all of the aspects that might make
Right.
up what that masculinity is, and we'll like go into some of those aspects, I think. But
Yeah.
I don't know
And
if that kind of answers your question in a general way.
yes, I
Yeah.
think what I mean, and to just to bring it back to what maybe people have heard, the concept of toxic masculinity was, in my perspective, this like feminist movement that like kind of we've polarized each other, right? There's been so much pain and trauma between men and women,
Mm-hmm.
and how we relate to each other, how we understand each other, how we connect, that is kind of, in my perspective, and at least in the world that I'm associated with and continue to be fed in through social media or through people that I meet, is, oh, we're actually healing a lot of that because we actually remember, oh, we need each other, right? We need
Oh
each
yeah.
other in our most truest forms. Now, I know we've had many conversations about these things, and why I felt so, excited to talk to you and bring this to the public is because I think you have a beautiful understanding that divine masculine is truly this inner union, right? You cannot have the divine masculine without the divine feminine. Can you go
Exactly.
into a little
Exactly.
bit about
Mm-hmm.
what your perspective is on that?
Yeah, totally. Great point. Yeah, exactly. Sort of as far as I understand it, we all have both masculinity and femininity within us, and
Hmm.
hopefully that divine form of it. And yeah, it's that beautiful symmetry and balance, I think, of those two energies within us all that makes us whole or holy beings. And the reason why some of us aren't holy is because, again, we've sort of prioritized one and not the other. And so whether it's this increasing polarization between men and women in our culture of like women not being tapped into their masculinity or men not being tapped into their femininity actually affects or distorts their own femininity or masculinity in their own like, oh, I'm a woman, so I need to be feminine. Oh, I'm a man, so I need to be masculine. And only focusing on those aspects, I
Hmm.
think will create a fragmented and distorted being. And so, right, it's as important that men sort of cultivate their healthiest form of their masculinity, whilst also recognizing how important it is to understand the feminine energy, not only within themselves but within women, and then understand how to use that energy, and how important it is not to shun it or disregard it or think that it doesn't exist.
Hmm.
Um, and so yeah, and then right, like understanding how, while we both have both of those energies within us, doesn't mean that your femininity will look the same as your woman's femininity, right? That even though they're both like, you both have both,
Yes.
that they will present slightly differently. And so you can't necessarily compare them right next to each other, but just understanding that they are different and you have both and she has both. And we all have to not only understand these energies, but respect them and harness them in a way. Yeah.
How do you connect with your own feminine energy?
Um, I might be honest and just say that most of my life, I think part of why I'm on this journey and part of why I'm trying to better understand my masculinity is because truthfully, most of my life I've felt slightly more feminine than a lot of men that I grew up around.
Mm-hmm.
Not in some sort of extreme way, but in subtle ways throughout my life, I'm realizing that like I give the classic example, the one that always kind of stood out most obviously to me and maybe to others was like if I was at a party or something, like putting my social anxiety aside, and obviously this was probably the coping mechanism for just my social anxiety to some degree. It's like, okay, where's the comfort? I would find myself oftentimes more comfortable and more frequently speaking with groups of women, hanging out in like the circles of women, than like over with the dudes, like watching the football game and like drinking beer and like, talking about sports or whatever, right? Not to say that that's always the case, but and so when I started to like notice that pattern, it's like, oh, I feel more connected to some of the females in my life, or I'm an artist and I'm creative and I tend towards these things than like again sports or some of the like cars or these kinds of things. And now I have an interest in those things, and I've certainly it's one really interesting note is like side note. As I've developed my masculinity, I think over the last 5-ish plus years or whatever, that I actually am more interested in these things, more interested in sports, more interested in mechanics in cars, more interested in actually hanging out with guys than women now, really.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know. I mean, again, I don't know if that was when I was younger a distortion where it was like something had happened to me or the way I was like overemphasizing my comfort around women. But because of that, and because of my more like a lot of people in my life have told me that I'm sensitive, that I'm very sensitive, and whether they mean it in a positive or negative sense, but like, and that's true as well. I'm not going to deny that. I'm a little bit more sensitive than your average guy. I tend towards creative, weird, spiritual, kind of ethereal kind of stuff than some of the average men tend towards the more like grounded, kind of just like,
yeah, like this is the way it is,
typical masculine, typical manly kinds of things. And so I don't know if that's how I tap into my femininity. But I would say that like fostering relationships with women that I respect and having like healthy relationships with women and not again shunning those feminine parts of me that like society or culture or other dudes might be like, you're whatever, insert derogatory term here. And being like, oh, and like sort of not feeling hurt by that, but recognizing that it's okay that I have these feminine attributes, whatever they might be, and not like, again, toxically kind of sweeping them under the rug and like pretending to be someone I'm not, I guess.
Yeah. And it's funny because, of course, there are so many men like you, right? Where normally, at least what I see, everyone's like, your masculinity, you have to tap into your femininity. It's like almost like men coming from this angle and trying to get over here. But you are unique in the fact that you've, like you said, been a little bit more connected and in tuned, I guess, with your feminine. But you've now had to grow more into, wait, I actually am like not tapped into my masculinity.
Yeah.
So like, the concept of that as when you were younger and all of us kind of growing up in this like facade, like, okay, that's masculine and I'm not that. So now I'm this and who am I? And I can't show up that way. And that makes me undesirable and invaluable and whatever it kind of brings to the forefront of a man. Right. So yeah, it's like, maybe now the question is, I see how you connect with your feminine energy is, you value rest and nature and emotions and creating and craving the things that are normally, very in essence of energy, feminine energy. Now, you mentioned something about 5 years ago, and maybe this can be like a double part question of what happened 5 years ago that put you on this little journey to track into like finding more divine masculinity, or at least being interested in learning more about these things, and then how now are you connecting with your masculinity?
Yeah, let's see. So, well, 5 years ago, if we all do the quick math, we know what happened 5 years ago. So COVID was weirdly enough, I feel like that's weird to say because people were like, "What? How did COVID affect your journey towards masculinity?"
Yeah.
I'm not saying that that's actually the biggest factor, but it was a factor if we're talking about
Yeah.
5 years ago.
I mean, it was a massive glal transition for so many people in so many different ways. So I'm so interested
It
to hear.
was. And as you mentioned the word rest as like a sort of feminine attribute, I think we were all sort of not maybe forced is, I don't know if that's the right word, but we all were able to rest a little bit more and we all were able to in different ways maybe step back and look at what the heck is going on in this world for us as individuals, but also as members of a society in which clearly there are, forces that be that can affect our lives pretty in that case pretty dramatically. And so I think it was a big introspective time for a lot of people. So I definitely took that time to deepen my, I'll just say generally my spiritual practice. But if I'm going to
Mm-hmm.
speak a little bit more specifically to I think what actually happened, how I came on this path to be like I feel something's off in my energetic balance here between my masculine and my femininity, and just like my behaviors in general
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
as a man, like it was very much like the way in which I lived a lot of my early adult life in my relationship to women and sex and romance and these kinds of relationships, which
Mm-hmm.
was, again, I don't want to put all of the blame on like my cultural and societal programming and these kinds of things. I mean, that's very interesting stuff for me to talk about, but I don't want to necessarily be like, I'm not at all responsible for this, and I was just programmed to be this way. And so certainly a part of, I think, masculinity is taking responsibility for what's yours and what's yours to do. So I'm trying to do that, but as a younger child, it's like you don't really understand this stuff, and I think we all are programmed as children in different ways. And I grew up with a certain outlook on what a relationship between a man and a woman looks like, and then what sex is about or not about. And
Mm.
to make a very long story short, I kind of woke up one day and realized that like I had a pattern in my relationships, my intimate relationships with women that was it just became such a pattern that it was frustrating that I was like, why do I keep repeating the same pattern?
Mm.
And a part of that was definitely my relationship to sex and how I now believe I was very much someone who like overemphasized the sexual component of my intimate relationship with a woman, and how that sort of clouded or overshadowed the more important, more spiritual, more heart-centered facets of not only my own being and how I relate to other people in general, but certainly intimately with a woman. And
Mm-hmm.
so it was this sort of like, I don't know if there was like necessarily one salient moment, but it just got to a point where I became, I guess I might say like slightly disgusted by some of my behaviors. And I was like, okay,
Mm.
something needs to change. This doesn't feel healthy. I keep repeating the same pattern. I keep hurting people. I keep hurting
Mm.
myself.
Mm-hmm.
And just it all kind of added up, and I was like, well, something needs to change. And so it was obviously not an overnight process, but it was a slow process into, okay, I got to change this. And then once I started to change that, then like it made me want to change other things.
Right.
And again, it was a very kind of long process, slowly over time, but I dramatically changed my relationship to sex and to women and to my relationships, and had to refocus like what it's all about, and what's
Yeah.
important and what's not, and tried to essentially unlearn some stuff and reprogram myself to have ultimately healthier relationships. And then it was almost like out of that came this discovering of like the masculine and the feminine energies, and like what a man really looks like how does a man treat a woman,
Mm-hmm.
and where is the respect lie between being intimate with said woman. And so I had to start to shift a lot of that. And it's just, as you know, like these things are rabbit holes, and so it's just, you start going down one rabbit hole and you find yourself like, holy shit, like there's a lot of
Mm.
there's a lot of mess down here. and a
Yeah.
lot of unlearning I had to do, and one thing leads to another, and it's been quite the journey. And so, yeah.
And the experimenting of it all too, because like you
Yeah.
go into a certain, you're like, oh, okay, this needs to change, or like you're saying, sex. So you start to drastically change how you approach sex, how you engage in sex,
Mm-hmm.
how you
Mm-hmm.
think about it, and that again, like you're saying, now brings up a whole different mirror. That's like, oh shit, now I have to look at different things because I'm not engaging in those
Right.
ways. Yeah, and on this podcast again, we go deep into just like the details, like and giving examples of like, yeah, what were some of the practices or like drastic things that you did regarding sex, your own self pleasure, your own like
Mm-hmm.
needs in that way.
Mm-hmm.
Like what specifically, how did you think about sex when it came to dating and intimacy, and then how did it shift, and what did you do literally in your habits,
Right.
and how have those morphed?
Yeah, great question. So as I mentioned, some of the developmental stuff, being a younger, I might even say child, even adolescent into my early adulthood. I'll just be honest. Like I was someone who, and I feel unfortunately it's pretty prevalent amongst most of the guys that I grew up around was looking at pornography, right? Like I think it started there. I think some of this sexual programming starts maybe more subtly within movies and television that aren't pornographic, but are
Suggestive.
sex. Yeah, exactly. Right. Suggestive or sex focused or focused on that aspect of the relationship between the man and the woman. And then, ultimately you find pornography, and I was someone who liked, unfortunately for better or for worse, and who knows exactly why, but took to it quite a bit, and found myself throughout my late teenage years, throughout, let's be honest, like my 20s, all my 20s into my 30s, just like watching porn pretty regularly. And that was something that I would go through phases with, of feeling like, as someone who was raised Christian as a child, like very, very, I had a lot of guilt about, a lot of shame about. And then kind of like, as that aspect of my spiritual life transformed, like kind of pushed that aside and thought, even went through phases where I thought it's healthy to look at porn and masturbate. It's healthy to be sexually expressive. It's healthy to, engage in certain activities and not be like, repressed in those ways in which religious people can be or are,
Right.
and so, but
Fair
yeah, so
enough.
it was like one of the first things that shifted was not only me questioning if the speed at which I start to engage in sex or even intercourse with a woman early in a relationship was healthy. Because again, growing up Christian, my mom would be like, "Wait till you're married." Like, please wait till you're married to have sex. And I kind of took it to heart when I was at a certain age. And obviously,
Oh yeah.
I lost my virginity in my late teens, and it's sort of like it's like sort of once you do it, it's like, oh well, I sort of crossed that bridge, and there's no going back, I guess. So might as well kind of just
You're spoiled. You understand?
yeah.
There's
And
no going back, so you might as well just be in the deep
might as well
end.
enjoy it, right? And
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 boy,
yeah, so
did you enjoy it. Did you have a great
I
run?
did.
Did you have a great run?
I did. Yeah. I mean,
Well, because
yeah,
there's two sides of the coin when it comes to this stuff, right? It's
sure.
like whoever's listening, it's like we all see what suppression can do, and we all
Of
see what
course.
too much expression can
Yeah,
do, right?
of
So it's like
course.
this
Right.
is what we're talking about. It's like, how do
Yes.
we actually find a balance and honor that expressive freedom is just as important as structured, mature protection?
Yes. And something like discipline, and something like restraint, and something like reverence for sacredness, right? Which I think is
Yeah.
like, again, it wasn't like that just instantly came to me, like how reverent, how
Yeah.
sacred this act is.
That took some
But that was
time.
sort of like, just quickly skip ahead because I could go on about the whole process. But yeah, it was realizing quickly what I now think, how incredibly damaging something like pornography can be to the mind and the heart and the spirit of a human being, whether you're a man or a woman.
Mm.
And I don't want to speak so extremely here, but this is actually something that I do feel pretty strongly about, that I do think it's a pretty evil force. And I do
No, it
think
is. Yeah.
the at least, at least in the form in which it exists now, I think there is maybe a place for art and expressive nudity, let's call it, or something like that.
Sure.
But the porn that we all know and some of us love, I do believe is a rather damaging and evil, toxic force for all of humanity, for young men, for young women, for old men, for old women.
This is scientifically proven, guys. So if you want to go and ask, don't ask ChatGPT. Sorry, track that. Okay, you're going to go to a normal internet browser and you're going to get the statistics on what porn does to the brain.
Yeah. The research is really coming out now, and it is out there. And obviously, there are people that will debate it, and you could argue there's research for both sides of this debate. But as far as I know, I've looked at both sides of the research, and it's like.
Okay.
So kind of at some point realizing like, okay, this is bad. I don't want to do this anymore. So it was a combination of trying to understand my relationship with women, generally speaking, and then also very much the sexual aspect of that relationship. And then turning away from pornography and also with that masturbation. Because, obviously it's probably safe to assume with looking at pornography, typically, not all the time, but typically comes masturbation as well. And we can go into this as well, but like, as I think you might want to, but as a more personal side of that, like not only looking at porn and not only how that's going to affect my relationship with women, but then the act of masturbating and ejaculating regularly, how that was also potentially affecting my. And again, you can look at the different facets of one's energy. So there's like sort of your physical body, your mental body, your emotional, and then your spiritual, and how something like not only looking at porn, but then also masturbating to it and then ejaculating as a man to it, what that will do to your being as a man.
I'd love to go into that. If you can go into any details that you've experienced yourself and or you've researched, or what your experience is, particularly with what you're talking about.
Yeah. So, again, kind of a deep, weird topic, that I'll try not to get too caught in the weeds into, but like, I started reading some, I started talking to people, listening to different podcasts about it, and then like read a book or two about this and started to understand more deeply. I think I always had an intuitive sense and an understanding of how powerful sexual energy is. I think anyone who's had a positive sexual experience kind of knows that there's something really crazy going on here, and it's a very potent and powerful energy, as you can experience it with yourself or with another being, and like that connective energy, but also just in an orgasm, like the amount of energy that you can feel coursing through your body in maybe a way that like you don't feel in any other experience. And so I sort of intuitively knew that was all very potent. And then even as a younger person, thinking about like, wow, like the seed that I expel in combination with the egg in a woman is what creates a literal human being. Like that's incredible, right? And thinking about how, okay, well, like this thing that's coming out of me, this fluid that comes out of me, this like sacred fluid that comes out of me, has so much energy and potential in it to create a human, that like I'm just letting that go, like 5-6 nights a week kind of thing,
Whoa,
whether sex with a partner, whether like loving romantic sex with a partner but not creating a child, or masturbating myself to pornography and letting that seed go. And so when I started to really like think about it and then look at certain literature and listen to other people talk about this and put all these pieces together, it really dawned on me that I'm like in short, wow, like this is not something that I just want to so frequently and easily give up and give away. And maybe some of your listeners are familiar with the idea or not, but it's not, the idea of semen retention is not really a new practice. There are ancients and people on spiritual paths where celibacy is a thing and semen retention is a thing for spiritual progress and or for to just maybe put it more simply and grounded, like just for health, right? Like for basic health. I truly believe, now obviously men and women have a slightly different experience with orgasm and ejaculation. But like for a man, a lot, if you just want to get off the spiritual track and just get on simple physical health, like I also was someone who like suffered from maybe subtle but like chronic health problems throughout my life, whether they be as simple as like allergies or energy or fatigue or depression and anxiety, these kinds of things. That like I now believe after essentially practicing more or less semen retention to relative to how I used to do it to a pretty large degree, that my physical health, my stamina, my mental clarity, my depression, anxiety, whether it be, other physical ailments, digestive stuff, skin stuff, creative energy, all has been improved, I believe, by not just like letting this energy out of me regularly. And so that became a part of it too, where it was like thinking about the sacredness of me doing this thing and me supposedly doing it with another person is one of the most amazing things we can do. Create a child, right? Create a human out of this sacred act, and to have such an irreverence for it where I'm like, I'm just going to like look at some internet porn, like jerk off. It all of a sudden became so gross to me. And so, yeah, just a behavior that I was like, I don't want to do that anymore, And so that was another part of it too, where it was like, not only was it changing my relationship to women and then stop looking at porn, but also not masturbating anymore and not really, and being much more careful about my sexual energy in general, and then my sexual energy as it pertains to the release of that energy in the form of an orgasm or an ejaculation. Yeah.
And that kind of goes hand in hand with a past episode that we've done in the Spring Portal episode 1, the language of the genitals, where we go into to a female and a male energetics, like the consciousness that actually lives in, the scrotums and in the semen and in the penis, and like all the ways that the energetics of that are affected with what you're saying, like not only from a physical health perspective, but like energetically can shift on like a cellular level, your energetic stamina and your creativity. And if you are giving it and depleting it all the time, there is no wonder why men are so disconnected from their true potential in these ways, in these energetic ways, and the discipline of that. And like, really, again, it kind of goes into, what the I don't even know what to call it, the subject that we're talking about here, your subtitle of, the boy struggles to become the man, right? This boy-like behavior, because when you're growing and you're experiencing like this pleasure and your hormones are raging for the first time, of course, it's like kind of have to go through that, like, but like as you...
Sometimes the energy does need to come out, let's be honest.
Well, exactly. It's almost like that's what's healthy. And I've heard a lot of men claim that like, oh, it's healthy to release. I need that release and blah, blah, blah. And it's yes, sir. However, you are still operating in a little bit of a boyish body, or whatever you want to, like, however you want to call it, like immaturity or primal, like get out of that like there's an evolution that now needs to happen with your mind and your body, where you're connected deeper into like, whoa, okay, what am I actually doing here? And as I grow and transform and mature, how do I need to operate with my body, with sex, with whatever else? So masturbation was huge from you, and celibacy, right? Is that something that you've also practiced?
Yeah. So I'll talk quickly about that as well, right? As a part of all of that and how it changed my relationship, not only to women, but to myself. And then again, there's a lot of tracks running parallel throughout this journey, as I'm sure a lot of listeners will relate to, that like, not only is your spiritual journey not a straight line, that oftentimes there's sort of like these little side quests you go on and parallel paths. And so amongst all of this, I would say that my relationship to God was also changing, and my relationship to like a more, I was, again, quickly raised Christian, but like throughout my adult life, more or less sort of turned my back to that upbringing, and more or less would just, I guess, call myself agnostic or atheist for the most part, and was acting as such, right? Wasn't praying, didn't have a relationship with God, wasn't reading wasn't reading the Bible, wasn't, thought religion was bad, and all of this stuff. And so started to come back to that in a different way. And obviously, in Christianity and other religions as I mentioned, as my mom was trying to convince me of when I was a kid, like save sex for marriage, kind of thing. And so as I started to then rediscover some of these principles and understand some of the teachings of, let's say, Jesus or of in the Bible or of other, sort of ancient religions, like some of this stuff has to have a place. It has to make sense. There has to be a reason for these laws or these guidelines or these things that we should follow, and that it's not just to control humans and make them miserable, that there's actually a good reason for it. And so I was trying to understand that. And I think I wondered about the whole like save sex to your marriage thing. And as I was, I guess at some point, like getting into a relationship with a woman, and sex was on the table, I started to think about like, yeah, like I think this is going to be the first time I'm going to try to not have intercourse, essentially, because, it wasn't as clear back then, but I think I was like formulating these ideas that like, some people I know won't agree with this. And I'm not saying that I fully have this figured out, but it does seem like if you have intercourse, and you don't pull out or use any type of birth control, like typically, not obviously, I understand there's cycles to this and you're not always going to become pregnant, but then like you're going to make a child eventually by doing that. And so like, that's the act that creates life, that creates a child. And it felt somewhat, at least personally for me, wrong that like my whole life, I mean, like the amount of times I had sex and didn't make a child, it started to feel weird. Like I was doing this thing that was designed for this purpose. And I was like, no, like that's not what it's for. It's for pleasure. It's just for this. It's for me. It's not, and it felt, to use a word, like unnatural. Because like naturally, if you were to do it, like, I feel like that's you'd ultimately be creating life. And so to sort of use birth control or use whatever method you were using, it started to feel like I was playing God a little bit. Like God designed this act for this purpose to create life. And I was stepping in and saying like, I'm going to do it how I want to do it and get what I want out of it without having to essentially like pay the price for it, right? And not that I think that having a child is paying a price, but without having to accept the full responsibility for my actions, which is like, yeah, this is an amazing thing, which no wonder it feels so good and everybody wants to do it all the time. But you can't, I came up with an idea recently, and I'm not sure if I love this, and I don't mean to offend anyone by this, but like it almost feels like sexual bulimia would be like people who want to eat food, right, and enjoy the pleasure of eating food, but they're like, oh, well, I don't want to gain any weight, or I don't want like, and so they throw up the food, and they're harming themselves in the process. And so it's like you want the pleasure, but you don't want to pay the cost or have the responsibility for the pleasure that you're enjoying. And so that's maybe a little extreme, but like it started to feel like that, where it was like this very hedonistic, self-serving participation in a sacred act without fulfilling that sacred loop of like of creating life, of making a child, of two flesh becoming one kind of thing, right? Like two people coming together in this divine union to do this sacred act and then create more life out of it, which I think is, what life wants, but what God wants. And ultimately what I think a lot of us want deep down is we want to create life. We want to create something outside of ourselves. We want to complete the loop. We want to have children. We want to give back to society, right? We want to,
yes.
There's so many beautiful things that there is in that. And so, yeah, it felt like it was cutting short the full beauty of that act and distorting.
Yeah. And again, there's so many, like you said, we can go down a million rabbit holes on how that's true. And also there are so many other things that are true, when it comes to practicing sex within, the consensual, safe, protected relationship, that, again, that people I do think need healing from, right? There's been so much trauma that's happened within relationships because, going back to what we're talking about, because of the understanding or the misunderstanding rather of what even masculinity and femininity is. And when we're not in our inner union, when we are not tending to the feminine and the masculine within us, and we are trying to extract our well-being and our okayness from another through fantasy, through, what you should be for me because I'm not okay and you need to be like this, and so that I can
Right.
feel this, and all the ways in which this can again be, it just is an all-encompassing subject of like what it is to be human and like why we're here to experience and not be confined. It's almost like this beautiful thing of when, I think people, at least, I don't know if it's an evolutionary journey or a particular person's journey where you feel it's almost like a necessary step to feel the confine and the suppression and then to liberate yourself from it. And then to come back to like, hold on, actually, now I'm going into a phase where I want to conserve and go in
Yeah,
more and
totally.
to put more boundaries and like have good godly order because the order feels safe now. Like before it felt restrictive and now
Yeah,
it feels safe. And you
exactly.
have to go there to even get here, So
Completely.
it's,
Yeah,
there's no judgment of people's journeys, but just
100%.
hearing people's experience. This is why I want to have these conversations with men, because it's like everyone is at different parts of this journey and it is all okay. But hearing your perspective on, what it started to feel like and having your unique articulation of your spiritual journey in tandem with like, wow, how I'm treating my body, how I'm treating what I actually want and need here on this earth, and like how I am actually serving God through my body and my relationship to another
Yeah.
is all coming straight into like a focal point of like masculinity, right? This divine, making it divine again is coming back to the sacredness of it. And it's okay to serve the multiple facets of what it is to be human and
Totally.
being just open. There's like a neuroplasticity that is needed to like follow
Yeah.
truth and God. And you really just answered one of my questions of like, how your evolution of masculinity changed into your approach to women. And it seems like you really just approached yourself differently, and that in just by proxy, you now approach feminine and your relationship and your intimate relationships within that. And and I'm sure because there's teachings within Christianity and all these different communities that are teaching different things. And it's like, but, and you feel true to where you are and just trusting that God's going to bring you the literature, the people, the things to kind of affirm where you're at, but also don't stop there. Keep growing, keep letting it
Yeah.
mold you and be open to, how you're going to shift and change. And what has been like in your personal journey, maybe in the past 5 years or even more recently, or something really that has stood out when it comes to like your form of literature or media that has like influenced you?
Yeah. Good question. Real quick before I answer that question, I do want to say how much I appreciate, your perspective on just recognizing, the individual journey and recognizing the forms of repression and oppression that can go on in different areas of one's life, whether that be from religion or from your parents or from your culture or from a friend or someone, of guilt and shame and these kinds of things put, sort of what feels like, again, sort of oppression or controlling, and the natural human spirit, which I think is part of our actually divine spirit, is to rebel against a lack, like I'll admit, like I'm not saying that religious organization, like people that have suffered real deep traumas and guilt and shame through religion, and your tendency to rebel against that and to go in the opposite direction is pure and divine. I think even if it leads you down a unfortunately like maybe not great path ultimately, that we could say it is all part of God's plan and it's not a straight line, and it's okay to veer and it's okay to rebel against things that feel repressive or oppressive, and just that, like I went on my own crazy journey and have no judgment or anything about like how people feel differently about this. Like I totally understand it all and
Yeah.
respect it all, and no two journeys look the same. And I do have faith that like everyone, if you are just, you care enough to consider yourself to be on a spiritual path, that you will ultimately like find the right path for you, as long as
Yes.
you're like trying and conscious and care and coming from a place of love. Um,
Yeah.
and it's okay to like wherever you are on that journey doesn't have to at all look like mine. And probably a lot of people, like, let's be honest, probably a lot of people don't, and a lot of people probably disagree with some of the stuff I just said, and that's totally cool too. And Lindsay, you know
Yes.
me. My
And
opinion's constantly changing too. So
yes.
disclaimer to everyone listening, like sometimes I say things and 6 months later I feel differently about it. And I want to
Which
create space for that too, you know?
yes, that is the point. I think that that's why we come on here and we talk about these things, because it's not like facts. Like we
Yeah.
have to
Right.
like be moldable and just trust that, just have the courage to question and trust that there is an omnipresent God
Mm-hmm.
who is within you and working with you and so compassionate and graceful and wants you to seek. That's
Mm-hmm.
all. Like, don't
Mm-hmm.
get stuck in one way or the other. Just keep seeking, actually, is what I've learned in my spiritual
Yep.
path of like,
Totally.
you'll just get stuck in the
Mm-hmm.
polyamorous stage, which
Mm-hmm.
maybe some people go through, but like, because there are beautiful, again, there's always going to be something that confirms your bias. Like, there's
Mm-hmm.
history
Sure.
and
Sure.
things that you could read. They're like, oh, well, that makes sense why humans did that. I mean, that's completely contradictory to this
Mm-hmm.
form of like
Mm-hmm.
understanding of God and like humans, whatever. But
Right.
both is true. It's like when we get to the paradox, it's always God. So I'm
Mm-hmm.
grateful for now, even though that's the most can be the most frustrating thing for our limited brains as humans, to be like, it's this and it's that. It's just where you are. Can you fully be in deep approval of where you personally are and just own your
Mm-hmm.
truth so deeply
Mm-hmm.
that like it has nothing to do with another? You just are so in tuned with what you are needing and how you are approaching certain things, and trusting that like the people that come into your life at certain points can take that medicine because it's their own anyways, right? We're always drawing in people as a mirror.
Totally. Yeah.
And where you are in your journey is actually perfect for another person in their
Yeah.
journey. It's just, even though it feels very difficult in the moment, but there's always a beautiful hindsight 2020 vision that you're like, holy shit, if they weren't
Mm-hmm.
there, I
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't be here.
Totally. Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So okay, so let's get back to that question. Yeah, I'd
Oh
love
yeah.
to hear some media or books recommendations that I'll probably put in the show notes of
Mm-hmm.
people who are curious about just things that have influenced you, or
Sure.
things that you have felt are like super potent for your journey.
Yeah, let's see. Where to start? I think it's I mean, I guess like ultimately it started by listening to various podcasts, and I don't know if I really want to pull one specifically out to, because it wasn't like it was like, oh, like one person or one podcast that started me on this journey, but just some of the stuff I started to listen to that started to change my mind about a few things. I gotta give some credit, and I know this name is also probably somewhat controversial. And unfortunately, I also want to, as a disclaimer, say like talking about your mind changing about things, where it's like at one point in your life something is medicine for you, and another point you're like, I don't need the medicine anymore. I
Yeah.
might actually say that this person is kind of that for me, where like maybe it was 5 years ago, something like this, that Jordan Peterson was someone who I started to listen to that definitely not only I don't know if I'd say the focus was so much on masculinity per se, but the sort of taking responsibility as a man, and like
Mm,
taking responsibility for yours and your life, and yeah, being mature and having things like discipline and using logic and truth, and yeah, like he helped me in certain ways for sure. Write a few things that I think that like the boyish, as you were saying, like the boy becoming a man kind of thing, where it's like he really speaks a lot to that, or used to, in a pretty potent way, of like
mm-hmm.
how to, yeah, like give up these sort of childish, immature ways of living, and like become a man, and like grow up, and like take on some responsibility, in these kinds of things. So
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to harp too much on his messages, but he was helpful initially, and then and I think one of the books that I read that really started to help me to understand masculine energies. And I do very much recommend this book to not only men, but also women, actually, to be totally honest, even though I do believe it's probably a book written a little bit more for like men to read. King, Warrior, Magician, Lover. That book really opened my eyes and my mind to understanding this. I think, as in the book they call it boy psychology versus like man psychology, which is understanding the sort of these sort of archetypes of your psychology that you sort of have or you develop as a child, and then how you're supposed to go through. In the book, they I think they refer to it as an initiation process. And how in our culture, the book opens up talking about like in the modern world, in the modern Western world, we don't have an initiation process to bring boys into manhood, just kind of like at all, period, seemingly.
Or women for that matter.
Or women for that matter, for sure. And so they talk about that, they recognize that, and then go on to break down these archetypes of the boy psychology, and then show you the archetypes of the man psychology and how they're related. There's like the four King, Warrior, Magician, Lover are the four adult or like man archetypes, and then I forget, or I won't try to go into all of the boy ones. But it's like it's really interesting to read and to see, like, because I'll be honest, it's kind of like, you ever like read like a really good horoscope and you're like, oh my God, that like speaks directly to me. Like, this is so like, holy shit. Like, how do you know that about me?
Yeah.
Like deeper, almost subconscious parts of our psyche that like you don't really want to think about or talk about or recognize. But then if you read someone telling you, like if you read about yourself, you're like, holy fuck, like that is me to a T.
Yeah.
That was sort of the process in reading this book, that I was like, oh my God, like I am trapped in this boy psychology, and I have not become a man in these ways. And so that book was really pivotal for me in recognizing and understanding it and being like, yeah, okay, like I don't want to be that Oedipal child anymore or whatever it was, And I think we all kind of have all of these archetypes in us. And it's like when we're a child, we tend to develop one because it helps us cope with ourselves and with the world, right? But the idea, I think, is to not only transition into manhood and turn these psychologies into the more mature form, but to every archetype also has a shadow side, right? So there's like the positive boy psychology, and then there's a shadow side, and then there's the positive man psychology, but there's also still a shadow that you can be like, have this more mature masculine psychology developed, but it can also turn into a shadow. And if anyone's a fan of like Jungian psychology, and he very much talks about the shadow, and it's not that we need to destroy our shadow or ignore the shadow. The awareness of the shadow helps us to, I think, heal it, essentially, or incorporate it, I think, as Jung would say, right? That it's not like we don't want to kill the ego, we don't want to kill the shadow. We want to recognize it, acknowledge it, understand it. Yeah. And then work with it and realize, like, oh, in this relationship I have with this person and how I'm behaving, like, what is that? Why am I doing that? And then, So that book was really pivotal. Another book I read in terms of that's like, again, seemingly written for men, but also I think would be enlightening for a lot of women who care about this subject matter to read, was The Way of the Superior Man by David Data. That book blew my mind, not only, again, up into my own understanding of my masculinity, but he talks about women quite a bit in it, and the feminine, rather, I should say.
Oh, okay.
And how it's So he'll talk about your masculinity and your role as a man and your masculinity, but he'll also talk about like understanding, like, when your female partner is behaving this way, it's not because she's crazy, it's not because she's whatever trying to manipulate you. Like, that's just how the feminine works, right? And so this sort of balanced understanding of like why you are the way you are, why the masculine is the way the masculine is, and why the feminine and the female is the way that she is, and how you're supposed to come together and balance each other. And there's so many different examples in the book, but like that it's a really complementary, beautiful thing if both parties understand what's going on and can just love and accept that part of the person, that like, why do men think women are crazy, and why do men think, why do women think like men are, assholes or whatever. And it's like, it's not because we are, as much as we don't understand the energy within each other and how different it is. And so
right.
so it
And
really
how
helps.
they it's like, why are books not why isn't The Way of the Superior Man on the freaking syllabus at your high school? Like,
It should be. It should
why
be.
the
Yeah.
hell
I mean,
are we not taught these things?
Yeah. And I'll say, like in that book in particular, maybe I just want to caveat, like, it's not that I agree with everything he says, right? There are a few parts in the book where I was like, I don't know. Or like there's parts that like are focused on sex in a way that I'm like, I don't know if this is necessary applies. But so but again, you don't have to, reading a book, you don't have to agree with everything, right? But it's great information. And if it helps you to understand yourself and understand others, then I think it's worth reading. And it's an easy read. It's a quick read. And so those are two books that really helped me. And then I'll finish answering your question in truth by saying that, reading the Bible. Reading the Bible is a book, and I have to give Lindsay credit for this, actually. Lindsay, quick shout out. Like, as we talk about all of this stuff, Lindsay has been pivotal for me on this journey, my spiritual path in general, but very much actually as it pertains to this stuff, and having our own relationship, and her, us going deep into these topics and trying to navigate our relationship at the time when we met. And at some point, for whatever reason, Lindsay, maybe you want to, you can speak to it or not, but like, we were talking a lot about, God and religion and Christianity and Messianic Judaism and these kinds of things. And Lindsay gifted me her Bible. She had a Bible that she had, and
you still got that one?
it's right here. Yeah, the complete
Hey.
Jewish Bible. It's
yes,
respect. Still got it. Still read
amazing. That's Sam Dorio's. That's my father's. So you get that masculine lineage.
That's it. Feel that masculine juice flowing through it.
Oh.
So much appreciation and love and respect for your infinite wisdom to give me that book, to give me the book. It's like, and so I don't want to talk about too much about it because I feel like that can maybe turn some people off. But it is true that like reading that book, really reading the Bible is as flawed as you might think it is, or as confusing as it might be, or as contradictory as it can seem. Reading the Bible was definitely a book, and continues to be a book that like helps me to know where, like, to focus myself and to ground myself in some truth, like some single source of word that I do believe has quite a bit of wisdom in it, but also has a lot of truth in it, and has stories, parables, anecdotes, advice, whatever you want to call it, that sometimes when I need that, it's there. And obviously there's like the very traditional, very old school, very religious framings of these things: the masculine, the feminine, relationships between men and women, sex, marriage, responsibility. Like, it's kind of all in there. That's why it's like, you don't have to necessarily be a religious person or a Christian or a Jew to read the Bible, I think. I know it's hard to read sometimes, and I know that it is quite triggering, and I know that it's confusing and contradictory, but I don't think we should throw out that baby with the bathwater. And it's been a book that's been by my side since you've given it to me. And and it's
cool.
It's beautiful. So
yeah, totally. And of course too, it's like people, we're all on the journey of like our relationship with this book that seemingly is the most famous book on the planet, right? And like how it's been translated and what people are getting from it, and how people are learning from it from a pulpit of someone's particular perspective, and then historically speaking, and all the things that go into it. But yes, like you said, it's like, if you're approaching the Bible with an assumption or a filter that like, this is saying what I think the Christians on the TV are saying, and I'm not going to fucking read it. Please
read it for yourself.
Let us all be mature, that like, again, I think that, like you were saying, just the most mature concept of maturity, at least in this point in my life, is like being able to be so like your neuroplasticity being so solid in the fact that like truth is truth and truth can morph and I can go and flow with it. I'm right. That's very feminine, is like me following God is not ever going to be based on how deeply like tied and crunching I can be onto one thought or theology or whatever, but it is your ability to understand how incredibly woven you are with it all and trust that the Holy Spirit is going to speak to you through a plethora of different ways, through different people, through different relationships, through different texts. And, you know, just the balance. I know we can literally talk for hours. We can have 5,000 episodes on this stuff and go down all the rabbit holes, and maybe we will, you know? So, okay, so that's great. The media that has been impactful, those are very, very incredibly potent stuff. Yeah, Jordan Peterson, even for me in my journey, he's been definitely there. And of course, on the opposite side of the feminine, you know, which I definitely want to do some episodes on, like the queen, maiden, you know, all the archetypes. The archetypes are so powerful for us right now, I think, in both ends. It's like I'm excited to like read the Way of the Superior Man, because I didn't realize that it was, you know, speaking of those both ways. And yeah, it brings up in me like talk about, you know, and I'll get into this with the episode when I interview my partner of like divine, like what we're experiencing in divine union and how it's continually bringing us into our own inner union. And I have an inner king that I need to call upon when I am feeling that like there's this extractive thing going on with a partnership. And, you know, we can go down again, million rabbit holes on what love means and what to expect from another, and like how to just be in a beautiful harmony. But that being said, how do you, at least at this point, how have you kept yourself accountable in the maturing of your masculinity? I mean, I know you have like you know, books and stuff that like have kept you kind of solid, and maybe a ritual or that you do, or a mentor, or anything that you feel has kept you accountable in maturing into your into your ever ending divine masculine journey.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, good question. A couple things. I would say one, maybe primarily my being in a relationship with a woman in this sort of, you know, after more or less making a conscious effort to not get into a, you know, serious committed relationship for actually quite a few years, as you know, you know, waiting for the right time, waiting for the right person, and wanting to get my head back on straight after all of this detangling, and reapproaching now an intimate relationship with a woman in this new way, you know, not like I've got it all figured out, not like I'm perfectly healed, but sort of being in a relationship and putting these new, you know, practices into play, and seeing how I show up in that relationship, seeing how it changes the relationship. And I'm blessed to be in a relationship with such an amazing, like, just an amazing woman who's on her own beautiful path and sees me for what I'm doing and respects me and loves me, and we have, you know, this kind of shared understanding in a lot of these ways. And it's not to say that aspects of some of the stuff we talked about as it plays out in our relationship has not been difficult, because it has, of course. And also we're just like two humans trying to still fucking figure it out. And so, you know, we're just, it's not at all like, there's not some sort of like enlightened, perfect relationship here, but I'm so grateful to have met someone and to be able to be in a relationship with someone who understands what I'm trying to do, even when it's difficult, and who can hold that space for me, and who can respect me and stay with me. And so all of that. So that what I say is the primary, the primary way in which I'm able to hold myself accountable for some of these things that I might talk about or want to practice and like need to actually practice, right? Because I'm guilty of this, and I'm sure other people are. It's like you can read the book and you can have the thought and you can know something, but it's much different to put it into practice
Mm.
and then to put it into practice when it's hard too, right? Where
Mm.
it's like, oh wait, you know what would be easier if I just went back to my old way. And so,
Yeah.
so practicing all of that in a relationship. I mean, I do believe, like you very well said, and I totally agree, that like being in a relationship are these amazing mirrors for us, and these people that God puts in our lives at the right time in the right way really can you transform. Not to say that you can't do a lot of work by yourself, because I believe you can, but I also believe that some of the most profound work happens in relationship. I think we're
Mm.
social creatures. I think we are meant to be in relationship, and it's important to do work by yourself, and it's important to take time for yourself. As you know, I'm quite the introvert. I will be a proponent of that, but you can't do it all by yourself. And being in a relationship will draw out all of the hardest things that you need to work
Mm.
on, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And so, uh, much love
Yeah.
and much appreciation and gratitude for Christina for being with me on this journey, and even you, like before her, like someone who definitely was holding up mirrors and dealing with some of my weirdness, as you know, as a close friend and someone who I spent a lot of time with, and was trying to figure some of this out with. And so,
Mm-hmm.
and then other ways I hold myself accountable are, well, I will just say quickly, showing up in other relationships, non-romantic relationships. So whether that's just platonic relationships with other women, or just, relationships with brothers and friends and family, right?
Yeah.
It's like, how does all of this, like, obviously we've talked a lot about sex and masculinity and femininity in regards to the union, but a huge portion of being a man has nothing to do with that, and it has a lot to do with just how you are as a man, as a human,
Mm.
as a guy in the world, dealing with strangers, dealing with parents, dealing with siblings,
Yes.
dealing with friends, dealing with the chaos around you
Yep. Your
everywhere,
colleagues, your clients.
everything,
Yep.
work. Like, how do you show up in work? Yeah, exactly. And so, I just try to uh, embrace and take on everything around me with this newfound sense of responsibility, accountability, truth, honor, like all of these sort of attributes that I associate with masculinity. That it's like strength and confronting, as Jordan Peterson would say it, like fighting the dragon. Like, it's the
Yes.
scariest, hardest thing you'll do, but like that's the gold is like under the dragon, right? And so you need
Yes.
to, like, I know it's
Yes.
scary. I know you don't want to do it. It's gonna suck. You're gonna get hurt, but like sort of going towards the dragon head on.
Mm.
And so some of that, and then another thing I would say that I am happy to report that I have done was like, well, doing things that you otherwise have been putting off for a long time. And one of those things was like, I wanted to join a men's group. And when it got to a point where I was like, I'm not sure which men's group to join, or if I want to join that men's group, or what it will be like to be in that group. Is this what I'm actually looking for? Um, I actually took it upon myself earlier in the year to start my own men's group. Whether that was a good
Yes.
idea or a bad idea, or I was ready for that, or I knew what I was doing or not, I said to myself, you know what, why don't we just do this and see what happens? So, without getting
Yes.
into too much detail, that was another thing that I was a big accountability piece, and trying to hold myself to like, okay, well, how much more can I develop this? And
Mm-hmm.
not only that, but now is it time for me to give back, to be of service to other
Mm.
men, and to not at all that I'm like, I consider myself an expert on this stuff, or some sort of have it figured out, or bastion for masculinity, but I wanted to see where my brothers were at with it, and I wanted
Yes.
to do what I could in my little way to facilitate a container for them, for us to not only talk about these things, it's a lot of the stuff that you and I are talking about actually, but to see what they wanted to talk about, and to see where they were at, and to see what they were struggling with. And so that's been a big part of it too, is starting a men's group, and having a really close, amazing group of brothers to come together to work on this stuff with. And so that
Mm-hmm.
was another big component. Yeah.
Yeah. Totally. I was glad you mentioned that because I think it's huge. I think it's what men, it is like a non-negotiable, I think, as you're
Hmm.
maturing and as especially when you're in union, it's like you need to be having, these men that are keeping you accountable and that you
Hmm.
guys are, like the classic I don't even know if it's a proverb but I always, hear my dad saying that iron sharpens iron. So it's like, you guys get in the ring together and do your thing so that you guys can show up for the world and penetrate the world in your fullness. And it does not come from only being isolated with your woman. That's
right. 100%.
That is not, not good.
I was guilty. That's another thing I was guilty of too, for sure. Like I felt the effects of that. It's like you get into a relationship, you love your woman, you love being around her, you guys are connected, but that can like demasculate you quite a bit. Yeah.
Yes. I mean, even talking to your friends about your thing, like, I think that's such a weird taboo between a lot of guys. It's like, yeah, sure. You don't have to go join a spiritual men's group, but like a lot of men don't even feel comfortable talking to their own dear best friends about their deep shit that they're going through with their woman, or like confiding in someone or asking advice or whatever. They just feel so isolated. And then that's a whole other thing about masculinity and femininity and what we can learn from each other, of like, spill your shit to each other. It's you need to be witnessed, like in it all. We all need to be witnessed. But wow. So as we close, I just think this is an incredibly potent and rich, packed conversation. And of course, will inspire definitely other episodes where I want us to keep talking about this stuff. But thank you so much for joining us and giving your heart and your soul and your perspective of your journey on this earth with your masculinity. If anyone wants to like reach out to you and talk to you more about this stuff, or even just engage with you as a human and like see what you do for work, he's an incredible artist. If you need graphic design work, if you're still doing freelancing, or just in general, if you are open to people reaching out to you for your services and or conversation, where can we do that?
Let's see, which email should I give? I'll just give my personal email. Yeah, it's rob.pizzolato@gmail.com. robpizzolato@gmail.com.
Perfect.
That's probably the best. I'm not really on social anymore these days. So gotta just maybe email me, which would be great. And so email me the
become pen pals. We're bringing
I feel
it
like
back
email
to
is
the
now
older.
like the snail mail, where it's like, oh, like I don't have the technology. Like send me a letter in the mail. It's like, you guys still email? Do people still email? No, I'm just kidding.
Dude,
don't DM me because I don't have Instagram.
There's Gen Zs that are getting off socials and like, I'm emailing and thinking it's cool. So, okay, great. We're going back to that. We'll make it cool before you think it's cool. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I'd love to hear from anyone. If anyone finds this interesting and wants to chat, I love to talk about this stuff, and an open book. And thank you for having me on, Lindsay. This has been great. I'm so appreciative of you and what you do in this realm, and I'm honored to be a part of it. So thank you. Thank you for having me on.
Yay. Thanks, Loomies. Have a wonderful day. See you next time.
Bye.